What's going on, everybody? Hope everyone is having a great night so far. I'm here with my co-host Brad and a very special guest, one of the best reporters out there in the city of Miami, Manny Navarro. Manny, thank you so much for taking the time out of your night to come on. We greatly appreciate it. We love your
Yes.
work ever since the Miami Herald and now with the Athletic, and we're huge fans of yours, and we're just really grateful you took the time to come on this show.
Well, thanks for having me on, man. Anytime I can talk to the fans and deliver some of my message as far as what I'm hearing and thinking. It's always nice, and I know you guys do good work and really impressive production, by the way, with what you do here with the show.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, I
Appreciate it, man.
really
Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Actually, I flew the drone out of the Miami River. I was doing the whole thing myself. So, I'm
cool.
kidding. No. Manny, once again, Coach Diaz, unbelievable, man. Every time I think it's over. He needs to go. He needs to get canned. We lose to Louisiana Tech, FIU. He just if there was a national championship trophy for the offseason, it goes to Manny Diaz. He surprises me once again. The fan base, Blake Baker is finalizing a deal to LSU. Does any of this offseason changes surprise you at all, Manny, after this season ended? Or, was this kind of an expectation on your side?
Well, I mean, look, ultimately, coaches are always looking for better options, right? They're always looking to see how they can upgrade either their coaching staff, their roster. And so I think it's always about options and what options are available to you. And I think in Manny Diaz's case, particularly with Blake Baker, he brought him in wanting him to be able to handle the play calling of the defense, to communicate well with the linebackers, to make sure that those guys got better. And if you go back and you just look at the results, I mean, the linebackers were kind of atrocious, the worst position I thought on the team, at least on the defensive side of the ball. And I think, as far as his defensive play calling, I don't put it all necessarily on Blake Baker and say it was just play calling when Miami's defense sort of fell apart against North Carolina, didn't play well in the first quarter against Oklahoma State. I think personnel had a lot to do with it. But in the end, it's about upgrading. And Manny Diaz, I think, was trying to upgrade his coaching staff, trying to make the necessary changes. And I said this, either on my podcast or maybe on some other shows that I've been on. I didn't think Manny Diaz was going to fire anybody. And part of that is the respect that he had for those guys because he brought Blake Baker in. So it's always about getting to put a guy in a position where he can get another job and save face, right? Yep. So I think that's what this was all about. This is all about when Blake Baker might be able to find another job. And I think, now was the time with what happened with LSU.
Listen, first off, I'm going to start off by saying Manny 2 times because, one, shout out to Manny Diaz for once again taking over the offseason, and shout out to Manny Navarro for coming on the show tonight. But I'm going to tell you this, Manny. When you talk about the ties that he has to guys like Banda, Baker, Packy, and I 100% agree with you. Before this offseason began, I did not think that any of this was going to happen, to be real. There were perfect opportunities of big name guys that it seemed like we were at least talking to and flirting with, and it didn't seem to go our way. And you know what? It almost felt like it was perfect timing. Not only with Coach Banda getting his deal to go to Utah State, but now with Coach Blake Baker, he is going back home to his hometown. He has literally no pressure on him. If you really think about it, he's going from having so much on his plate at Miami to being a defensive coordinator, controlling the linebackers, and pretty much controlling the whole defense, to now he's going to an LSU team to really only coach linebackers under a defensive coordinator who really hasn't called any plays. So if you really think about it, who knows if they told Blake Baker, hey, you have at least experience calling plays. You could possibly help out Coach Durant and be maybe even a co-DC. So it's a win-win for both sides, in my opinion. And I think Blake Baker has no pressure going to a team like Louisiana, where he's from, and he's going to be coaching a position group that has never really lacked. No matter how bad they were, they're very similar to the Michigan Wolverines. No matter how bad their season ends, they still produce linebackers. Yeah. And I think it's going to be a good position for Blake Baker. I wish him the best, but honestly, man, I want to get right to it, Manny. Who are some of the options you're hearing as far as linebackers coach? I have a few things in mind, either going after just a linebacker coach, maybe someone in Travis Williams, a former Auburn coach, or does Manny Diaz kind of take the back seat and kind of retract his words of gaining the defense by him and kind of just being the head coach and hiring somebody, not only Travis Williams, but maybe a Will Muschamp or a Kevin Steele as the defensive coordinator. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's all about options and what's available, right? And I think, Manny Diaz felt that at the end of the season that the defense would be better served if he was the play caller. Now, I think he said that at a time when those were the available options to him, right? I mean, we didn't know at the time what was going to happen at Tennessee as far as their, whole situation with the NCAA. And now they could be essentially parting ways here with Kevin Steele paying him $1 million to go away. And, so to me, I think it's just about who wants to come, who he could bring in here. If he could bring in an elite defensive coordinator, somebody who could take that burden off of him that allows him to just focus on being the head coach and all of those responsibilities, I think then he'll go for it. But if he can't find that guy, if there's not that perfect match, I could see a situation where, a guy like T-Rob, who's been a defensive coordinator, assumes that title, co-defensive coordinator with Manny Diaz, and you bring in a linebackers coach, a guy who maybe hasn't called plays, and he just comes in and coaches linebackers. So as far as names that I've heard, and again, this is all external. Manny Diaz has kept a lot of this stuff, close to the vest in terms of what he's doing behind the scenes and who he's interviewing. But from talking to some guys who I know represent coaches as agents, talking to some former players. I just put something out on the Athletic on our live feed. Where we kind of tweet our own internal information. So if you subscribe to the Athletic, you'll get to see some of the stuff that I put there. But 5 guys that I mentioned. Number 1, Travis Williams, who was the linebackers coach at Auburn, was part of the staff when Rhett Lashley was there, and obviously T-Rob was a part of that staff as well. So I think from a connection standpoint, in terms of relationships and so forth, I think Travis Williams is a guy that you could see as a potential candidate because he doesn't have a job. Obviously, you mentioned Kevin Steele earlier. I don't know how the contract situation would pan out, how much of it Miami would have to necessarily incur in terms of picking up whatever money he's owed, or I don't know what the contract was that he signed at Tennessee, but essentially, if Manny Diaz wanted to go that route, Kevin Steele would be a guy who's obviously been a head coach, been a defensive coordinator for Clemson and Auburn and a lot of good teams. And I think, he's somebody you would have to consider. One name I heard from somebody who represents coaches is Tony Pecoraro. He's a guy who was the former defensive coordinator at FAU, Southern Miss, North Alabama, Alcorn State. I think right now he's a defensive analyst at South Alabama. He's somebody well known in the coaching community, and a guy that's a good recruiter in South Florida. Granted, I think this would be a step up for him coming to a Power 5. I could see him maybe just coming in to be linebackers coach. Another interesting name, Florida's Christian Robinson. Somebody mentioned him to me. Another writer who I work with at the Athletic that's well tuned in, said, maybe Christian Robinson would have been a great fit before the whole Michigan thing. I don't know where he's at contractually. I talked to our Florida Gators beat writer earlier today, Alan Taylor, to talk to him about the whole situation with C-Rob. And, he's a guy that I think from a recruiting standpoint would be like hiring another T-Rob, a guy who just a home run hire in terms of recruiting, and a guy that you could bring in and maybe make co-defensive coordinator, right, and have him work with T-Rob in terms of helping coordinate the defense. And then the last one, this one's internally from a former player who was very well connected, but Michael Barrow, who of course was here for a long time, 2007 to 2013, and then went on to coach with the Seahawks, and then kind of took a step back from football. He's been retired the last couple of years, but my thought is, he's a guy that would be a great fit here because he wants to see Miami succeed. He loves the program. And I think, maybe a couple of years off has regenerated his engine a little bit.
Wow, man. You dropped a bombshell with the C-Rob note, man. I heard the Barrow and I heard some of the other guys, but C-Rob, that would be very interesting. I think it comes down to, does Manny Diaz want to be the head coach, or does he want to still control the defense in a certain type of way? Because I think most of the names you mentioned, he's still going to control that defense and make someone maybe co-DC like you mentioned. But I think if you go after Kevin Steele or Will Muschamp, that kind of tells me, hey, Manny Diaz kind of wants to be the actual head coach and just delegate everything. But at the end of the day, man, I think every decision has came down to Manny Diaz the past 2 or 3 seasons when it comes to the offseason, and he's succeeded expectations. We have to convert it to on the field and get actual wins that brings us to our next topic, Manny, something that came out today, which is the schedule for the Miami Hurricanes. What's your thoughts on the schedule at first glance?
Yeah, I mean, well, we knew who most of the opponents were going to be. It's just a matter of what dates they were going to be set. And when the season ended, I started to sort of take a deep dive into every single one of those rosters and looking, who those teams lost in terms of guys leaving to the NFL through the transfer portal, all that kind of stuff. I really think the toughest part of the schedule is early on. If you look at the first 6-7 games, that to me is where the toughest part is. I mean, obviously Alabama being national champions, that's going to be a tough game. But I do know from looking at that roster, there are a lot of guys that they got to replace on the offensive side of the football, particularly some of their big-time playmakers. They got basically 2 starting offensive linemen back. I know they're going to be heavily favored in that game, but if Manny Diaz and these guys are really as focused and fired up as they are, as they were at the end of that bowl game, right, when they were trying to come back and win that game, and they upgrade – at some positions, particularly linebacker here, where maybe a guy like Corey Flagg is ready to be a starter at the start of the season, then maybe you give him a fighting chance against Alabama. I think everybody's always just made it sort of a foregone conclusion that Bama's going to roll over Miami. But I think looking at how young those guys are on the offensive side of the ball, I think you got to give Miami a shot. I don't think it's impossible they can pull that off. And then I really like Appalachian State's team. I think, they've been the best group of 5 team for several years now in terms of just consistently winning and 9, 10, 11 win seasons. And, they got Chase Bryce they picked up from Duke. Miami obviously, pounded Duke 48-0, but I think he's got more weapons around him at Appalachian State. So I think that game, if you ask me where would I rank the toughest games, I think that's probably the 3rd or 4th toughest game of the season. Obviously, North Carolina, NC State, both of those teams. I think, North Carolina, like Alabama, has to replace some skill guys. But I look at that schedule and I say to myself, Miami can win 9, 10, 11 games if they show up and they play right. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility. I think that they've got enough experience back. I just worry about, wide receiver. Are you going to get the kind of consistency you need at that position to light teams up and to beat a team like Alabama or to beat teams that you're supposed to beat? And then linebacker, that to me, just having a guy or 2 guys at that position that you can count on, like you could for years when Shaq Quarterman and Michael Pickney were here, that can make your defense a whole lot better.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartily agree, Manny. First 3 games, 3 out of the first 4 games, you're playing a very tough non-conference schedule. Mel Tucker does a great job with Michigan State. And who's going to be our quarterback? D'Eriq King, how's his rehab going? I guess what, everyone kind of is stating, they'll find out more when they undergo surgery with D'Eriq King's knee. And then, we'll see how the rehab goes. But, who'll be your starting quarterback? Can an underclassman who doesn't have much experience, really take control of the football team? You got Alabama first game of the season. Their OC is going to be Bill O'Brien, Doug Marrone as well. He's going to be their offensive line coach. You know what to expect with Alabama. It's going to be a tough game. If you compete, great. If you win, even better. They'll make a movie out of that game. Let's be real. Then you got Michigan State, App State. So get through those first 4 games. And like you said, Manny, I mean, this team can win 11 games. They're capable of doing that. Your second toughest opponent is UNC. Very good quarterback with Sam Howell as well. They're bringing in Ty Chandler, Tennessee's leading rusher, and it's coming off of a bye week. Miami in the past has struggled after bye weeks. Let's see if they can perform well. And we always play. We underperform or it's a tough game in Chapel Hill. I don't know what it is, but it's always a tough game when we play UNC at their house. So it's going to be an interesting game. And that NC State game as well, I circled. They have their quarterback Leary coming back. I think he's a pretty good quarterback. Dave Doran is a solid head coach. He did a great job at Northern Illinois. I think he's going to do a great job at NC State as well this next season with Leary as their quarterback. So it's going to be interesting. And I know I may sound crazy. Don't count out Florida State. I think Florida State is going to be a lot better, and we're going to be playing away. I'm not saying, we're going to cruise through there and dominate, but I think it's going to be a closer game than last year.
Manny, before you add on to that, not really necessarily a hot take, but I honestly do think, looking at the first 4 games that we've been mentioning this whole time, I do think whether or not De'Aaron King is healthy to start week 1 against Alabama, as a realistic point of view, I really do think if De'Aaron King's not 100% healthy and you really don't think he can go, I would almost save him till almost week 4, week 5, and make sure he's 100% healthy, because in my opinion, realistically, you can go 3-1 the first 4 games, whether De'Aaron King's your quarterback or Tyler Van Dyke or Jake Garcia is your quarterback. I have that much faith in the rest of this position groups on the football team, not only them, but the coaching and developing that you're going to see going from last year to this year. I mean, Manny hit it spot on with the cornerback and receiver play, but one other position group I think that's going to excel to the next level, especially we're going to be able to see right off the bat against Alabama, and that's the trenches, specifically the offensive line. You talk about Garin Justice, who is someone who is very good at developing, has started to land the right kids just in your backyard, and he's getting the right big guys that are starting to build that SEC type of offensive line. I'm really excited to see that next step that they do, because you could almost see a brand new offensive line just because of all the good bodies that we potentially could have.
Yeah, I think, that's one of the most experienced positions on the team. I did an article last week, just snap counts and starts, career starts, games played. And you look at the offensive line, and essentially you got 7-8 guys who have all started at the college level. And I think, you look at that group and I thought the goal was to go from being absolutely terrible in 2019 to just average in 2020. I thought they hit that goal. They were average. They weren't dominant up front. I don't think they opened up enough running lanes, and you saw the running game struggle at times. But I think now going into year 2 with your new offensive line coach and Garin Justice and getting guys a little bit earlier, I think without question, they're going to be a unit that improves. And I think it's great that you got a guy like Jared Williams back for a 7th year, because now you don't need to throw, Jalen Rivers in at right tackle. I don't know if you guys remember the days. I mean, I'm older than both of you, I'm sure. But, I remember days when offensive linemen would come in the first 2-3 years, they really didn't play. It wasn't until they were redshirt juniors or seniors that they would come in. And Miami had like a good little tradition going there when they were at their peak. And yet, 2 years ago, you saw having to play 2 true freshmen right away, what that was like, having, Zion Nelson out there at left tackle and Ja'Kai Clark at left guard. Now, those guys are going into their 3rd year with experience, and they're going to have competition. I think, you're going to see a guy like Jalen Rivers compete for one of those starting interior guard spots. You're going to have Navon Donaldson back. So I think, even though they're bringing back guys who were full-time starters essentially last year, I think some of those guys could be knocked out and just having, be a part of the rotation. And that's good when you get to that point, because that means you have a really, really good unit on the field.
Yes.
No, absolutely, Manny. Who do you think as a freshman right now coming in, Ryan Rodriguez, Michael McLaughlin, Lauren Seymour, can have an impact first year in the Power 5 level?
Yeah, I feel like you guys are looking at my budget of all the stories I'm going to be writing here in the weeks ahead. You're bringing up subjects that I was going to write on.
Love it.
Yeah, no, I it's funny. I know everybody gets excited about the freshman class, and rightfully so. There's some good players in there. But I think, from doing as much research as I have just the last few weeks, there really aren't as many freshmen who really play significant roles their first year. It just isn't very common in college football. I think, you'll see guys maybe at quarterback, maybe at running back or receiver come in if their team really needs a guy to play right away and be a true freshman and contribute right away. But particularly offensive line, like what happened with Miami a couple of years ago, I don't see that happening with any of those guys that they recruited in this class. And I think that's a good thing. You want those guys, more importantly, to get used to the speed, to get their bodies in a position where they're not forced to be on the field. So when I look at guys who I think can make an immediate impact, I think it's more special teams. I think it's the kicker. Certainly Andres Borregales, he's going to come in. I think that's his job. I look at a guy like Leonard Taylor. He's going to play in the rotation. I look at some of those receivers like Romello Brinson. I think he could be part of the rotation. Number 1 on my list, I think, is Elijah Arroyo. And the reason I say that is, you had a lot of 2 tight end sets last year, obviously with Brevin Jordan and Will Mallory. And I think the fact that Elijah's coming in now in the spring, he's going to be here for all these spring practices. He's going to have a chance to put on weight. You look at the other, young guys that are at that tight end position. None of those guys have gone on the field and really made a big impact. So I think Elijah's the kind of guy who can come in here and be a nice complementary number 2 option to Will Mallory, just because he's so exceptional in the passing game. So if you ask me who's the biggest freshman impact, I would say Borregales and Arroyo are the two guys I would put 1 and 2. And then after that, you can make an argument for different guys. Maybe a guy like Deshaun Troutman can come in at linebacker and be a part of that rotation there, or maybe even win a starting job coming out of camp. We'll see, just because the bar was sort of set so low there at that position.
Yeah, makes some very good points, Manny. And I think at the end of the day, man, not only Miami, but Manny Diaz is proving time and time again that he can come up and kind of do things that are almost the impossible, things that we didn't think is going to happen. And I think a lot of this stuff kind of fell in our lap, whether it be the T-Rob situation and DeMarcus Van Dyke kind of just staying at home. I think that is one position coach that I think is kind of fallen in the background in all this. And I think it's very important that we kept DeMarcus Van Dyke because he did a lot of things behind the scene as far as recruiting. And now he can actually finally get credit for it on paper, so to speak. And I think with this Zoom meetings and how the day and age is right now with coronavirus, having guys like T-Rob and DeMarcus Van Dyke that could kind of relate to these kids on a personal level via Zoom and Skype and camera view, pretty much what we're doing, is going to hit home for a lot of these guys. And, Manny, you make a good point about these players having to get used to the scheme and how they run things, especially a guy like Elijah Arroyo who kind of fits right into the offense that Rhett Lashley does. And you look at last year, Manny Diaz hit the home run higher, getting a guy like Rhett Lashley and Derek King who are somewhat familiar with each other. You go into now, you hire a guy like T-Rob who's very familiar with the guys in our own backyard, so it helps with the recruiting. He's also already developed as far as the secondary. Then you have options at defensive line. What do? You bring in a guy that's already been at this program, has already succeeded, and not to mention the current defensive lineman on our program, guess who recruited them? Jess Simpson.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
Yeah, I think Simpson, and you talk about the recruiting angle, I think something that's somewhat underrated with Simpson is the fact that he's kind of a god in the state of Georgia, as far as among high school coaches, a guy who won multiple state championships when he was coaching there and, rose through the ranks to not only coach in college, but coach with the professional team, with the Falcons. And so I think he's very, very well respected. I think he's the guy who can really open the door to Georgia for the Hurricanes from a recruiting perspective. And then, T-Rob has been one of the elite recruiters, not only in South Florida, but I would say the entire Southeast, when he was coaching for the Gators and the 1 year he spent at Auburn and then the last 5 at South Carolina. He's just a guy who, when he walks into a high school, he's respected. And I shared this story a couple of weeks ago on my podcast, but, a perfect example is Miami Norland. They're a school that at times has had really super elite athletes like, Duke Johnson and Eric Flowers. Well, I talked to their coach, Daryl Heidelberg. I've known Coach Heidelberg since he was coaching baseball at Miami Central, like back in the early 2000s when I was the high school's guy for the Miami Herald. And he shared this story with me just about how, T-Rob would come by even when they didn't have guys, even when Norland wasn't good, right? When they didn't have big time recruits, and how essentially, those relationships helped him land players because they had guys who sort of emerged later in their careers as seniors, and he was able to come in and talk to those guys late in the process and sign them, and that's what he did at Auburn. He got one of the top cornerbacks in the country, who's now in the NFL playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, sort of at the last minute, because he had that relationship, and I think that's what he's going to bring, and I think he's going to pass that on to DeMarcus Van Dyke, who, like you said, already has really great relationships in South Florida, in the inner city. DVD he's a really friendly guy. People like him. He knows a lot of people. He knows the parents of a lot of the kids nowadays that are growing up and playing high school football. So I think having him on the staff, having him out there to recruit, I think a lot of what Manny did with his coaching hires was about recruiting. It really was. I think it really was to sort of upgrade and take it to another level. And I think his next hire potentially with linebackers is going to be the same thing. I think it's going to be recruiting driven.
And that's definitely refreshing to hear, Manny, because I know we're all very aware, at times it's very frustrating when programs out of state go to South Florida and grab kids, and Miami's always finishing second or third. I think as a program, Miami should be getting the best players in South Florida, or at least evaluating the most talented, maybe under the radar kids they view. They shouldn't be losing recruits to out of state programs. If you lose one of Florida State, okay, Florida, that's bound to happen. At least they stay in state. But this is your area. This is that white picket fence that Howard Schnellenberger was trying to create. I understand that it's modern college football. Things are different, more social media involved. Kids are more connected with college coaches across the country. But this is your backyard, and you're going to let other programs go in there and take kids. I think that needs to stop. And I really do appreciate Manny Navarro acknowledging that, Coach Diaz is trying to get a staff together that really are a bunch of great recruiters. And that's what we've been missing at Miami, ace recruiters. And I think having an SEC experience will be key because it's a different animal in the SEC. And I think if you bring in a guy like Travis Williams, a C-Rob from Florida, I think we might be up to something, moving forward in this program.
And it's interesting, too, because, Manny Diaz is bringing on a very good approach to this. On the offense, we always had the talent. We just never had the developers that were proven, right? So what did he do? He went and got 3 offensive-minded coordinators, and Rhett Lashley, Likens, and Coach Justice. On the defensive end, we were lacking not only the talent in specific position groups year in and year out, but we were also lacking the development. So what is he doing? He's going and getting inner city guys that can relate to these kids and also have developed on a bigger national level, whether it be at defensive coordinator positions or on the National Football League level. And I think with the linebacker position, I think it's really going to hit home. And I think it's also going to be – it's got to be a home run hire. I agree with Manny because, cornerback and linebackers alone are the 2 position groups that we have lacked going all the way back to Manny Diaz being the defensive coordinator. And I think with T-Rob and DeMarcus Van Dyke, you kind of have a 1-2 punch that you look at this next coming class in the 2022 class, you have about 7 or 8 different guys that you could possibly land. I think we could land at least half of those, and it's a win-win. But I think this linebacker hire is going to be just as big because the linebackers, again, is one thing we've been lacking. You look at someone like Wesley Basante, who seems like he's between Miami and Florida State. That is one kid who we have to keep at home, and we got to find a way to land him. So I think it's got to be someone with South Florida ties, someone that is at least somewhat proven. Because at the end of the day, this is Manny Diaz's year to kind of say, hey, I can be that head coach.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. And one thing I'll say, and I'm not trying to disparage the talent here in South Florida, but I think, one thing, and I've said this the last couple of times I've gone on different shows or on podcasts, I think, look, I love the talent in South Florida. I think some of the greatest players to ever play football have come out of these neighborhoods. But I also think, unfortunately, Miami's fallen victim to, hiring some coaches who aren't necessarily great evaluators and maybe pay too much attention to the star ranking system. And hey, this guy's a 4-star and this guy's a 5-star. And I think part of it, down here is some of the guys that come out of this area, I hate to say it, have been a little overrated or just, they've kind of been given this tag because they look great in shorts on 7-7. And I think, playing the game is an entirely different animal. And a lot of it, is about maturity. And when you get to the college level, can you be coached? Are you a coachable talent, or do you have too big of an ego? And I think, unfortunately, what's happened with a lot of kids, the change that I've seen in the 25 years that I've been doing this is, you didn't have the Rivals and the 247s and all these people doing star rankings back in the 90s and 80s, right? You had your Super Prep magazine, but that was like national. You had a top 100. Now, you got over 3,000 kids ranked in the star system every single year, and they live and die with that. It's like a badge of honor for them. And I think, what Miami coaches have to do is really just be good talent evaluators. When Miami was recruiting at its best was when guys like Butch Davis were here on staff working with Jimmy Johnson. And, I talked to Butch about, the things he would look for in players. And it's different than what I hear from maybe some of the coaches that I talk to nowadays. Just being able to read a player, see why it was so important for them to play multiple sports, for instance, to deal with disappointment, the things that they look for on the sidelines,
Right.
Body language, all of those things. And, I think what's happened today, unfortunately, so many of these guys go to these recruiting combines and they run 40s and they, look great wearing, those funny helmets, catching balls. And it's like, oh, that guy's going to be a star. And it's like, well, no, maybe he's great at flag football, but, put some shoulder pads on him and ask him to nut up in a big moment. Is he going to do it? Is he going to show up and be the star that he looks like in shorts. And I think that's a really hard thing to evaluate nowadays. And I think, part of it again is just this ego feeding system where, guys are constantly told when they're, in the 10th, 11th, 12th grade, oh, you're the best, you're going to be a star. And I think it's the worst thing you could tell kids. I really do. I think constantly feeding their ego and making them think they've achieved something is just doing them harm. And I think hopefully, more, and I know why, again, I know maybe I'm going on a tangent here, but I think, part of it is these high school coaches want to hold on to those kids. So they kind of do have to feed their ego. They don't want them to go and transfer to other schools. So I think, the best thing the best coaches do in our city down here, the Roger Harriets, the guys, the Roland Smiths, the guys who have won championships and have been around this for a long, long time, is they tell the kids the truth. Hey, you might be great in shorts, but you need to improve on this and you need to improve on that. And I think what Manny Diaz is figuring out here is, hey, I need to have coaches who can go to those high schools and evaluate those players and really see what we need to be dominant again, and recruit the guys that are really going to, and it doesn't matter what their star rankings are or anything like that. It just matters, do they have those characteristics that you want? And I think, that's the difficult part nowadays, because people do care, right? We all care. We all look at, well, how many stars does this recruit have? And Miami has a great recruiting class because they've got, 2 5-star guys and 11 4-star guys. And it's like, no, how many of those guys have we seen go through Miami who didn't do crap, right? How many of those guys have we seen not do anything in their career? Or we all said, man, why didn't they live up to those expectations? It's the coaching. Well, no, sometimes it's the players. Sometimes it's the guys who need to be coached up and have the right kind of attitude. Or maybe they had too many people around them growing up who just kept feeding them lies instead of feeding them the truth to make them their best. So I just think that's the secret here, man. You want to build a fence around South Florida, but it's more than that. I think it's winning, convincing that you can help players get better when they're at Miami, and then also not making mistakes, not recruiting guys who are not really part of the DNA of what you want. And I think Manny Diaz has been trying to do that here with these last couple of recruiting classes.
You hit it on the head, Manny. We can't keep overlooking the Tutu Atwells, the Elijah Moores. We can't go after the 5-stars every single time. I mean, you look, for example, the Hollandale kids, 2022 class. Not all of them have the highest star rating, but I can tell you right now, you take all 4 of those kids from Hollandale, you're going to have a very good secondary, regardless of the ratings or not. And I think it goes right back to the coaching, like you mentioned, because you go back to the Miami Knights camp, Mark Pope was the best guy out there that night, and Devontae Smith was out there playing with him as well. And he was also rated higher than him. One went to Bama, one went to Miami. The rest is history after that. It goes all the way back to coaching because, I mean, at the end of the day, we do have the talent. I mean, you see it on Sundays all the time.
Manny, what's kind of the feel around the program right now with Coach Diaz going into year 3? Is this a make or break season? Because, obviously, 8-3, it is improvement from last year. Fans, they do want success. Noise is great in the off season. Manny Diaz, he does put on a great show, but they want wins at the University of Miami. Everybody wants to get back to their old ways. I think that's very, very tough to do. But I think people want to be, they want to beat their Notre Dames. They want to beat the Alabamas. They want to beat non-conference top 25 opponents. They want to win the ACC. So what's kind of the feel going on around the program with Manny Diaz going in his 3rd year at the program?
Well, I can tell you that, I talked to their athletic director, Blake James, right after he hired Manny. I went into his office and sat with him for an hour to talk about, just what his mindset was in hiring Manny. And, he really didn't even look at anybody else. Manny was number 1 on his target. And I asked him, I said, well, how long do you think it's going to take to win, to seriously win and seriously contend? And he told me then 4 to 5 years. He thought that the state that the roster was in, the fact that they didn't really have a quarterback on there that they felt great about, the fact that, Manny needed to upgrade, coordinators and hire better coaches, it was going to take 4 to 5 years. And so I still think that, if Blake James is the guy who gets to make that decision, I think as long as next season isn't a complete disaster, I think he's going to give Manny Diaz an extension. He's going to give him a chance to, coach beyond the four-year contract that he has right now. And I think that, they're going to try to continue to build and move this thing forward in the right direction. I don't sense that they're ready to fire him, but I know that there's a lot of angry people in the fan base who want to see results. Like you said, it's been a long time since this program has been really in the national championship picture. They were there for a flash in 2017, right? For a couple of weeks where everybody felt good, and then it just came crashing back to a halt. So to me, I don't like to sit here and say he needs to win this many games to keep his job going the next year, because I think it's kind of silly. I think every situation is different. Because I think if you were to tell me, hey, De'Aaron King has a huge setback and he can't play till the 6th or 7th game of the season. Well, if Miami goes 3-3 in those games, are you going to blame Manny Diaz for that because of what happened to De'Aaron King, right? I mean, so I think it's always relative to sort of the situation. But I think, you look at year 3, I think he needs to improve. And I think he is putting a lot of pressure on himself by saying, I want to be the guy to call plays, right? He's acknowledging that we weren't good enough on defense. I'm taking that responsibility. And so I think for now, I wouldn't say his seat is warm. I think the administration feels like, okay, they improved from year 1 to year 2. They got a better coaching staff, right? He's made changes to the defensive staff, and let's see what he does. And I think as long as it's not a complete disaster, he will definitely have a year 4 at Miami.
Completely agree. Now, looking at those first 4 games, Manny, if somehow, some way, Manny ended up going 2-2, you think his seat is now warm?
I mean, it'll heat up. Certainly, there'll be more expectations put on him in the sense of hey, you got to finish the season strong. Like I said, to me, it's a complete disaster, and a complete disaster to me is 500 or worse. Yeah. And it's all circumstantial. I think De'Aaron King's going to be ready to go. Everything I've heard is he's going to be ready to go by the end of July, ready to play. He'll be back in practice in August. But again, that's what we're hearing. We'll have to see what happens once we swing around to August and how quickly he gets in there. So sure. I think the program's headed in the right direction. And I think for now, you just got to give Manny a chance to do what he does. And if the defense improves, I can see this team winning 9, 10, 11 games and people feeling good about, what's happening going into the future.
Manny, before we let you go, I got 2 last questions for you. The first one is, what is the probability, in your opinion, as a fan, that Rhett Lashlee would leave after this next coming year, or he would get an extension and stay? That's the first question. And the second question is, out of the 3 guys you mentioned earlier today about the linebacker position, that being Michael Burrow, C-Rob, and Travis Williams, who would you personally want? Okay,
well, I'll answer that last one. I don't know the other 2 coaches well enough, C-Rob and Coach Williams. I don't have a relationship with them, so maybe I'm biased by saying Michael Barrow. But I just think Barrow, who I do know for many years of covering the team down here, and know he's a really good guy at heart, and I think he's a good recruiter and a good evaluator of talent. He knows what it takes. He's coached at the NFL level, had success with the Seahawks. I think, to me, if I had my choice, I would probably pick Coach Barrow first. But that's not a knock on either one of those other guys. But I think Coach Barrow, he's been away from football now a couple years. And if he's really hungry and wants to come back and help the program, I mean, I think his record alone, his accomplishments and being a former player who's played at the NFL level and had success, I think I like that more so than the other 2 guys. But again, I don't personally know the other 2 coaches, and I don't know enough about them to give them maybe a fair shake. And then your other question was about what again? I'm sorry, Brad.
Rhett Lashlee. Do you think he an extension, or that you think he possibly leaves after next year?
No, I think Rhett Lashlee is going to be looking for a head coaching job. I think he's ready for that. I think it's just about the right situation. And so I think there's a reason why you have 2 other guys who are coordinators on the staff, on the offensive side of the football. I think the moment Rhett is ready to make that jump, I think he's ready for it. I think he's good for it. I think he could be a good head coach. I think he's a guy who's a good talent evaluator. I think he's well respected in the coaching circles, and it's just a matter of when his time is right. And so I would tend to think, UCF, to be honest with you, I look at that job, and I know Miami fans are probably hating me saying this, but I look at that job as sort of a good landing spot for a guy like Rhett, because I think, he's got he's got the ability to go into that program and have success like a Josh Heupel or some of the other coaches before him. I think he could do that there. But for now, he's Miami's offensive coordinator, and you gotta just enjoy him. I think, you look at what he did this year, didn't really have much of a running game, in my opinion. I thought, the guard and center play was average to below average this year in terms of, opening holes in the running game. I think they're going to get better. And once you start to see this team run the football, you're really going to see his offense explode, because it's much more about running the ball than it is throwing the ball.
I will add on to that, Manny, lastly, that when De'Aaron King went down and N'Kosi Perry came in, it almost seemed so flawless and smooth that the offense almost picked up. And not only the offense, but specifically that running game, it almost seemed like the more deep passes that we actually progressed, whether or not if the receivers actually caught the ball, but the fact that N'Kosi Perry was keeping the defense guessing and balanced, it almost seemed like our running game became a lot more easier in that aspect. So I would hope getting a guy like Charleston Rambo, hoping a guy like Mike Harley that comes back, you have two deep threat guys that I'm hoping with De'Aaron King coming back that we could kind of keep the defense on their toes a lot more to where that running game could be a lot more easier as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt. When you can stretch the field, that's going to help you up front. And I think, I just want guys that can hang on to the football, man. I just want guys that are going to come down with the catch, right? I mean, that's what we all want. And look, there's some talented young guys, man. There are some talented young guys. I think, you look at a guy like Romello Brinson. I think he could be your number one receiver for 2-3 years here. It's just a matter of when that light bulb comes on for him and when he really feels comfortable. I really like Keyshawn Smith as well. I think on the outside, I think he's a guy who knows how to get behind the defense. And then Rambo, he's a guy who's actually dropped some balls. He had some struggles at Oklahoma. So, everybody wants to focus on Mark Pope and D. Wiggins and their drops. But, he's a guy that, hey, you're going to get a chance, but you got to hold on to the football. And if not, there's guys behind you that are younger that are ready to go. So I think, look, they got 12 bodies at that receiver spot. I think they're going to find somebody this year. Somebody will get open consistently for the deep ball, and then it's just a matter of do they hang on to it.
Manny, last question before we let you go that I have are the Miami Hurricanes, are they done this season with the transfer portal, or can you see any other late additions to this program?
I mean, the tricky thing with scholarship guys that you always got to remember is the 25 initials. Okay. And so essentially you can only sign X amount of guys, 24, 25, depending on how many you count towards the year before or a year later. And I think that, you look at their situation now, they're filled up. They got the 24 spots essentially with the 3 transfers that came in. Now, I know guys have transferred out. Tate Martell officially transferred out. Robert Burns, the running back, right? All of those guys, they're gone, but that only counts towards the 85 in the long run. And, the NCAA still has a lot that it needs to iron out, in terms of one-time transfers and being able to immediately play. And then, do they expand it from 25 to 30 or 35? All of that will be voted on, I think, in the next cycle, not necessarily this one. I think the only thing that might get approved for this cycle is the immediate transfer. In other words, being able to not have to sit out a year.
Yeah, the only 2 guys, in my opinion, Manny, that kind of made sense. I was kind of already the impression that Robert Burns would transfer. So it made sense about a month ago when they started reaching out to Mark Anthony Richards. I think that could have possibly been a guy that would pretty much take Robert Burns' role, and then maybe possibly a linebacker in need as well.
Yeah. And I think all of that is going to depend on, and again, I don't know how they can move the numbers around and all that kind of stuff, but, like a couple years ago, Jalen Phillips, right? He came over and he had to sit out a year. That could be that kind of a situation maybe with a Mark Anthony Richards or somebody else. So, you talk about being, quote unquote, done in the transfer portal. I mean, I think you're always looking at the transfer portal. It's just a matter of when are guys eligible to play. So I think you could see a situation where maybe they add somebody, but that dude's got to sit out a year because they can't count his scholarship towards the 25 initials. Again, I know that they can play a lot of different ways with the scholarships and count this guy here and that guy there. But right now, from what I understand, the 25 initials are done for this recruiting class.
Well, Manny, man, we appreciate you coming on and taking some time out of your busy day. Make sure you guys go check out the podcast with him and Kelvin Harris as well. Manny, if you want to plug in any of your information, this is the time to do it, man. We greatly appreciate everything. We want Cane fans to tune into all your great work as well.
Yeah, man. You can obviously get a subscription to The Athletic. Any support that I can get there. It's only like, I think, $3.99 a month or whatever it is to subscribe. And the reason I would tell you to subscribe if you're listening to this is it's not just the Hurricanes coverage, it's the national coverage. I mean, we've got really good college football writers, Bruce Feldman, Nicole Auerbach, Andy Staples. All of those guys are national writers. And then we got, a good sort of local team, Andy Bitter, who covers, Virginia Tech. We got different guys, Grace Rayner, she's covering Clemson, and you get to read all that. So instead of, just saying, your subscription isn't just good for me, it's good for everybody with college football. And if you're, if you love soccer overseas in Europe and you're a big soccer fan, you get access to all of our content there. The Athletics are really good, worthwhile subscription. And, I would just tell people to sign up because it's worth it. And the Wide Right podcast, man, I have a blast with that. Kelvin Harris is on with me frequently, and I got a bunch of other guys who I bring on occasionally. And so I'm going to try to continue that as much as I can here in the offseason. I'm trying to relax a little bit because it was pretty intense for me. I had to cover the Miami Heat during the NBA Finals run and the Hurricanes at the same time. And so I was kind of nuts. So I took the last week off to relax a little bit, but I'm going to get back on it here as we get closer to spring football.
No worries, man. We greatly appreciate it again, man. You drop amazing nuggets on that Wide Right podcast, and thank you again for tuning in. As always, Cane fans.
All about the U. Go Cane.
All about the U.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, man.
Take care, man. All right.
And it's a wrap, everyone. Thank you, everyone, joining us tonight. Over 366 people. Make sure to hit subscribe and the like button before you head out. And always, all about the U, guys. Go Canes.